Hey guys! Tonight we're going to walk very slowly into one of the stinkiest, most ambitious, and weirdly impressive chapters of ancient engineering. When the Romans tried to bring plumbing indoors, you'll hear the soft trickle of aqueducts, the hiss of steam from marble bathhouses, and if you listen closely, the subtle squish of something you really didn't want to step in. You probably won't survive this, if you're allergic to lead questionable hygiene or group bathroom activities. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world everyone is falling asleep to Roman sewage facts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the shadow of a weather-worn bathhouse, its bricks soaked in centuries of moisture and ambition. The floor beneath you is uneven, worn smooth by thousands of sandaled feet. Somewhere far below, water still moves. And despite the rubble, the faded paint, and the distant smell of something floral and something foul, you can sense it. This was once impressive. The Romans, bless their aqueduct-loving souls, had a dream that water should come to them. Not fetched in jugs or prayed for in droughts, but piped, channeled, siphoned, and sluiced straight into their homes, bathhouses, and temples. They weren't the first to think about indoor plumbing. Minoans, Egyptians, and Persians had a go, but Rome doubled down, with marble, and engineers with extremely specific opinions. The bathhouse you're in now would have once echoed with laughter, gossip, and occasional shouts about someone clogging the drain again. Water ran through channels under the floor, warmed by fires in hypocausts, basically ancient radiant heating. Steam rose from the caldarium, the hot bath drifting lazily past frescoed walls. You can still see the outline of Neptune painted above a long-gone fountain. And the plumbing, it was everywhere. Beneath the floor, behind walls, even running vertically through multi-story buildings, something even modern contractors frown at. The Romans used clay pipes, terracotta bronze pipes, and yes, lead. So much lead. Historians still argue whether this contributed to their decline or just gave everyone mild brain fog and a good excuse for bizarre emperors. Outside, the water began in aqueducts, those grand arched highways for hydration. Gravity pulled water down from springs over mountains, through tunnels, and across valleys. Some ran over 50 miles without a single pump, just perfect math and relentless stonework. And when it finally reached the city, it filled cisterns, fed public fountains, and drained into latrines, or flooded them, sometimes both. But this particular bathhouse wasn't just about bathing. It was the Roman version of a mall, a spa, and a very humid town square. People didn't come here to clean up and leave. They came to stay. Hours on end. Massages. Political arguments. Maybe a cheeky dice game in the corner. And all that time, water flowed underfoot, warm, mysterious, and occasionally gurgling in ways that suggest you should move away. Right now. One quirky tidbit you might enjoy. Some bathhouses had inscription stones at the entrance, scolding patrons not to do their business in the pools. Yes, that was a problem. No, we're not surprised. Also, crocodile dung was sometimes used in Roman skincare and cosmetics. Imagine slathering that on, then sweating it off in a room full of senators. As you walk farther inside, your feet echo off the high ceilings. A fragment of mosaic crunches under your sandal. You pause. In the corner is the ghost of a toilet, not an enclosed one, but an elegant stone bench with a keyhole-shaped seat, backed by a wall trough. And below that, flowing water, always flowing, always washing it all away. This was luxury. This was civilization. And this was just the beginning. You step outside the dim bathhouse and blink into sunlight filtered through the arches of an aqueduct. It stretches above you like the spine of some long-forgotten beast, ribs of stone casting shadows over the grass. The water glides silently overhead, unseen, but steady, one of the greatest logistical triumphs of Roman engineering. And honestly, a bit showy. Romans didn't just want water to arrive. They wanted it to arrive elegantly. Aqueducts weren't purely functional. They were architectural statements. You walk along the base of one now, craning your neck to follow its precise curve as it descends ever so slightly toward the city, just enough to keep the water moving by gravity. Not too fast, not too slow. Just Roman. To build these wonders, engineers had to account for topography materials and the fact that sometimes Mother Nature is just rude. When valleys got in the way, they built bridges. When hills loomed ahead, they tunneled through them with picks, ropes, and probably quite a few curses. Some aqueducts ran through miles of solid rock dug from both ends and somehow, miraculously meeting in the middle. Historians still argue whether that was pure, genius, dumb luck, or both. The Aqua Appia, the oldest known aqueduct in Rome, was built in 312 BCE, almost entirely underground, because early Roman leaders were still a little shy about flaunting their waterwork muscles. But by the time the Aqua Claudia and Aqua Marcia were flowing, Rome was positively splashing in civic pride. Fountains burst from plazas, villa pools shimmered in the sun, and even the poor could fill their buckets at public basins fed by water that had traveled for days. You follow a side path to a maintenance access point, a little archway just tall enough to duck through. Inside the stone corridor is cool and damp. A faint trickle echoes in the silence. This is where the real work happened. Engineers and slaves would crawl down here to inspect cracks, remove debris, or sometimes rescue very confused fish. Yes, fish. One quirky inscription discovered near the Aqua Virgo warns workers not to lose the carp again. Apparently, someone thought stocking the aqueduct with fish would be both pretty and practical. It was not. The fish often ended up halfway to someone's bath, thoroughly stressed. As you move deeper along the aqueduct's shadow, you pass a shrine built into the stone, likely to the goddess Cloacina, protector of sewers and drains. A small marble figurine watches you pass. Her expression says, "Flush responsibly." You nod respectfully. Despite the grandeur, aqueducts weren't invincible. Saboteurs, earthquakes, poor maintenance. They all took their toll. Water theft was also a problem. People would secretly tap into the system to divert water to private homes or illegal bathhouses. That's right, Rome had underground spa clubs, complete with smuggled water and probably overpriced olives. But for a while, the system worked. Water flowed from mountains to marble. It cooled temples, filled baths, fed fountains, and flushed waste. And all of it depended on the perfection of slope, the patience of builders, and the quiet miracle of stone holding water over air. You glance upward one more time as the sun catches the rim of the aqueduct. A fine mist drips down from a leaking seam, catching the light like a prism. Somewhere far above, a stream is still flowing into the heart of an empire that refuses to be forgotten. You follow the aqueduct's slow curve into the city's edge, where grandeur fades into grit. Here, the water begins to change character, no longer noble and arching, but redirected, diluted, and deeply involved in the least glamorous Roman problem: poop logistics. Yes, Rome had a waste management system, sort of. It was more like an optimistic wish backed by very determined engineers and a whole lot of trial and error. You're now walking beside a narrow alley where small pipes stick awkwardly out from tenement buildings, Rome's insulae or early apartment blocks. They reach like crooked fingers over the street, dripping who knows what into shallow stone gutters. These gutters, called Euripi, were supposed to carry wastewater and other stuff downhill into larger channels. In theory. In practice, not always. Sometimes they clogged, sometimes they flooded, and sometimes someone upstream just dumped everything out the window. You hug the wall instinctively. Before indoor plumbing became widespread, Romans had to get creative. In wealthier homes, slaves would carry chamber pots and empty them into designated pits, or out in the street after dark. There was even a time-tested shout to warn passers-by, "Gardez l'eau," in medieval France. But the Romans had their own rude equivalents. Still, accidents happened. You suddenly understand why so many Roman streets were built with raised stepping stones. One of the stranger facts: Rome had a urine tax. That's right. Emperor Vespasian realized urine rich in ammonia was useful for tanning leather and laundering togas. So he taxed the collection of pee from public urinals. Some even had decorative basins where citizens could make their, contributions. The phrase pecunia non olet money doesn't stink originated from this. Historians still argue whether that phrase was literal sarcastic or both. You step into a small courtyard where slaves once dumped night soil into clay jars destined for the Cloaca Maxima Rome's massive central sewer. From there, waste flowed eventually into the Tiber River. But even the cloaca couldn't handle it all. During heavy rains, it backed up. Badly. There are accounts of fountains running brown, of temples flooding with waste, and of senators having to cancel meetings due to olfactory conditions. In this corner, you spot something curious. A small bronze pipe embedded in the stone wall with a spout shaped like a lion's head. It drips slowly. That's not for drinking. It's a downpipe carrying runoff from a roof cistern above. Rome's buildings often had complex systems of rainwater collection, not just for baths and fountains, but for emergency use when aqueducts failed or were damaged. Roofs were sloped carefully to guide every drop into underground reservoirs. You suddenly appreciate how dry your socks are. Not everyone had access to these marvels, of course. The poor often lived in upper stories without plumbing. Their best hope was a chamber pot and a steady hand. Richer folks, however, could install full toilet systems connected to water channels complete with stone seats and flow-through flushing. You'll see one later. It's shockingly advanced and slightly terrifying. But right now, in this muddy courtyard, with its mix of clever engineering and human improvisation, you realize plumbing wasn't just a luxury, it was survival. It was public health dignity and a quiet kind of civic pride, even if it was occasionally very, very gross. One quirky footnote before we go. Archaeologists recently found a perfectly intact toilet seat made of wood in northern Roman Britain. It still had notches from the original builder's chisel, which just goes to show, even on the outer edge of the empire, the Romans tried to keep their backsides comfortable. You step over another gutter, catch the scent of something ancient and not entirely dead, and continue your journey into the heart of Roman sanitation. You find yourself at the mouth of a tunnel, not just any old channel carved through stone, but the Cloaca Maxima Rome's most legendary sewer. It yawns open like the throat of a slumbering beast built wide enough to swallow ox carts and stubborn goats alike. The air is damp with a hint of minerals, and something much riper. This enormous drain was originally dug in the 6th century BCE under Rome's early kings. Back then, it was a glorified ditch to keep the forum dry, but over centuries it grew into a fully enclosed stone sewer lined, widened, and occasionally celebrated with civic pride. You step closer and peer down. A shallow stream still flows through it centuries after its architects took their last bath. That's either inspiring or horrifying depending on your optimism. Roman engineers didn't mess around with drainage. The Cloaca Maxima was meant to be the final artery collecting runoff, latrine discharge, and excess water from all over the city. Homes, baths, fountains, it all drained here. If the aqueducts were Rome's veins, this was its colon. You walk alongside it now, tracing the stone-paved maintenance path. A rat scurries by too fast to identify whether it's modern or very, very ancient. Shrines dot the walls, tiny altars with soot-blackened ceilings. Romans, ever superstitious, offered tributes to gods like Cloacina, spirit of the sewer, to keep things moving. You can imagine the prayer. Please don't let it back up during Saturnalia. One quirky tale tells of an engineer who claimed the cloaca could drink the rains and never burp. Bold. Historians still argue whether these boasts were practical engineering data or early Roman marketing. Either way, when a storm rolled in, you really hoped the cloaca wasn't feeling temperamental. As you descend a bit farther into the tunnel's echoing darkness, your sandals splash into a thin trickle of water. It's cool, constant, and somehow comforting. A sign of a system that once worked, even if imperfectly. The walls curve around you with smooth Roman precision, the stones laid without mortar yet still interlocking like puzzle pieces. There's a calm in the repetition, a rhythm in the dripping. You notice pipes feeding into the sewer from the side, some bronze, most terracotta. They vary in width, some smaller than your wrist, others wide enough to fit a fist. Romans built these to siphon not just waste, but gray water from baths and kitchens all flowing downward in a silent ballet of downward pressure and gravity. Above ground, the streets were deceptively cleaner thanks to this system. Public latrines drained into it, bathhouses too. Even temple courtyards had runoff channels leading here. But let's not sugarcoat it, Rome still stank, especially in summer, especially near the river where the cloaca finally emptied its burden. And that's the real trick. All of this, every drop and scrape and slosh, ended in the Tiber River. Yes, the same river where Romans fetched water, washed clothes, and performed rituals. Not exactly sanitary, but in their defense, bacteria hadn't been invented yet, or rather hadn't been understood. Romans genuinely believed fast-moving water purified itself. To be fair, parts of the Tiber flowed fast enough to carry your sins or your sandals far away. You stop at a small side chamber. A faded inscription dedicates the tunnel section to a builder named Marcus Plautius, who likely never imagined his name would be remembered for plumbing. And yet here it is, preserved not in marble on a hilltop, but in the low whisper of cool stone and flowing water. Above you, the modern city pulses. Below, the Cloaca Maxima keeps doing what it does best, carrying away the parts of Roman life no one wanted to think about. Except, of course, you. You emerge from the cool belly of the Cloaca Maxima into sunlight again, blinking as your eyes adjust. The city hums around you. Vendors hawking olives, children running between columns, and somewhere nearby a donkey, absolutely losing its mind. And above it all, something odd catches your attention. A subtle shimmer along the edge of a public fountain, followed by a man quietly muttering about headaches. You drift closer. The fountain is a marvel. A carved lion's head spits water into a basin, catching light in graceful arcs. People dip cups and hands into it, laughing. One woman fills a jar. Another washes grapes. But the man, he shakes his head and mutters again. His temples throb. He's not alone. This is where the Romans might have made their biggest mistake. See, the aqueducts brought water clean, fresh, and mountain-born. But then came the plumbing. And the plumbing brought lead. Romans loved it. It was soft, moldable, and resistant to corrosion. Perfect for pipes, valves, and decorative spouts. Unfortunately, it was also mildly poisonous. And by mildly, we mean enough to mess with your memory, mood, and fertility. You crouch near the pipe feeding this very fountain. The end is a dull gray cylinder, slightly sweet-smelling if you lean too close. Lead has that odd aroma like old pennies and bad decisions. The water running through it. Crystal clear, but invisibly tinged with legacy. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning played a role in Rome's eventual decline. Some say the exposure was too minimal to matter. Others blame it for erratic emperors' population drops and a suspicious number of nobles with tremors. One scholar even wrote Rome was a great idea poisoned by its plumbing. Poetic, maybe dramatic, maybe true. You walk a little farther to another water source this time, fed through terracotta pipes. Clay was the older method and still widely used in poorer areas. It was heavier, more fragile but safe. Many homes preferred it, especially outside the city. But lead was fashionable. Lead was elite. And if you were rich and reckless, your pipes sparkled. Interestingly, the word plumber comes from the Latin plumbum, meaning lead. So yes, every time you call one today, you're technically invoking ancient Roman metallurgists who also had to explain, no, the pipe shouldn't hiss like that. Another quirky tidbit, lead wasn't just in pipes. Romans used it in cooking vessels, cosmetics, and even wine sweeteners. Lead acetate, called sapa, added a sugary note to spoiled vintages, which means dinner parties may have been a neurological gamble. You pause near a family drawing water into clay jugs. A child drops hers and it shatters, spilling not just water, but a whole day's worth of fetching. No one blames her. They just sigh. Because when plumbing fails, whether in marble villas or alley fountains, the result is the same. Thirst, mess, and one very tired little girl. Looking back at the fountain, you notice the lion's mouth has been patched. A quick repair done with cloth and pitch. Maybe they ran out of lead. Or maybe someone finally wondered why their hair was falling out. Either way, the shimmer is still there. Beautiful. Deadly. Very Roman. You follow the quiet sound of trickling water down a mosaic-lined corridor where the air grows warmer, softer, and perfumed with something vaguely citrusy, or perhaps just the memory of it. You've arrived at the entrance to a Roman domus, one of the private villas belonging to the upper crust. And inside, for the elite few, plumbing reached a level of comfort that would make even modern homeowners raise an eyebrow. The door creaks open. You step into a spacious atrium, sunlight filtering down through an open roof. At the center is a rectangular pool, the impluvium, which catches rainwater in calm, symmetrical ripples. This isn't just for show. Beneath it lies a cistern, part of a system that keeps the house flush with water year-round. Quite literally, you turn a corner and find yourself standing before something unexpected. A private toilet, not an outhouse, not a chamber pot. A real built-in stone seat with a gently sloped drain channel beneath it, fed by a quiet stream of water. It flows constantly like a miniature brook through polished marble. You look around. No door, no privacy. Just tasteful wall frescoes and the faint echo of dignity. This wasn't uncommon. Romans didn't prioritize bathroom privacy the way we do. In many villas, the toilet was simply part of daily life, positioned near the kitchen, or even opening into gardens, because nothing says luxury like using the restroom while admiring topiary. You reach out and touch the wall near the toilet. Embedded into the stone is a tiny bronze tap. Not a twist knob like you'd see today, but a lever valve. Open it slightly and water trickles down to aid flushing. Plumbing meet drama. Of course it didn't stop there. Rich homes had baths too, not just tubs full bathing suites. The balneum included heated floors thanks to hypocaust systems piped in hot and cold water, and often small fireplaces or boilers tended by slaves. Some even had miniature steam rooms. One villa near Pompeii had pipes laid through the walls to prevent mold buildup from humidity. Yes, they were fighting mold 2,000 years ago. Respect. Historians still argue whether every villa had full indoor plumbing or just the most opulent ones. But archaeological evidence from places like Herculaneum and Ostia Antica show that even mid-tier homes had running water. It wasn't just about status, it was about habit culture and the Roman desire to tame nature one pipe at a time. There's also a quirky inscription here, scratched into a wall beside the toilet. Someone carved a short poem, a crude one, about garlic digestion and revenge. We won't repeat it here, but it proves that even in lavish surroundings, humans have always had creative bathroom humor. You pass a doorway draped with fading cloth and enter the kitchen. Here, plumbing served a different role. A trough-style sink catches your eye, fed by a small pipe from the roof cistern. It has a carved spout shaped like a dolphin. It probably gurgled when the water pressure dropped, but it's charming all the same. One slave would have been in charge of managing water, boiling it, storing it in amphorae, and making sure the system didn't freeze or leak. That meant inspecting terracotta pipes for cracks, watching the cistern's levels, and occasionally crawling under the floor to clear blockages by hand. You silently thank every plumber, ancient and modern. As you wander into the garden atrium again, you notice birds bathing in the impluvium, flicking water into the air. Nearby, a clay pipe hums faintly water, traveling through darkness, obeying ancient calculations. The Roman in you nods with satisfaction. The modern in you wonders if the lead content has hit your bloodstream yet. But for now, in this quiet villa where water flows through walls and even toilets look like shrines, you can appreciate what Romans built. Comfort, convenience, and a plumbing system ambitious enough to rival their politics. Sometimes more reliable too. You step away from the quiet calm of the villa and into the chaotic bustle of a public latrine, because not everyone in Rome enjoyed marble bathrooms and dolphin-spouted taps. Here in the heart of the city, hygiene took a more communal approach. And by communal, we mean you're about to sit elbow to elbow with strangers while trying not to make eye contact. The room is larger than you expect, spacious, echoing, and open to the air. Long stone benches line the perimeter, each carved with regularly spaced openings. Large round holes overflowing water channels. There's no privacy wall, no dividing screen, not even a polite curtain, Just you 30 or so strangers and a shared understanding that sometimes you just have to go. Public latrines were everywhere in Roman cities near markets, theaters, forums, and temples. They were funded by the state, cleaned eventually by public workers, and often quite beautiful. Mosaics lined the floors. Columns supported shaded roofs. Some had running fountains nearby where people could wash their hands. It was surprisingly a social space. People chatted, did business, gossiped. Senators may have discussed policy here. Gladiators may have compared bruises. If your day included shopping and bathing odds, or it also included sitting here for a bit, you ease down onto one of the benches mentally at least. Underneath, a gently flowing stream carries waste toward the larger sewers. Another water channel positioned behind the seat acts as a rinse path for the infamous sponge on a stick. The tersorium, and yes, it was shared. You look toward a communal vat of vinegar water in the center of the room. That's where the sponges sat between uses, marinating in a mixture meant to disinfect. Each person would grab the sponge stick rinse, use rinse again, and return it. In theory, whether every Roman was equally diligent in rinsing, we can only speculate. Historians still argue whether the sponge system worked hygienically, or whether it simply spread pink eye faster than you could say, carpe diem. One quirky record describes a prank where a thief stole all the sponge sticks from a latrine during a festival, leading to a brief riot and one very poetic lawsuit. The acoustics in the room are oddly serene, light splashes, faint echoes, soft murmurs. The latrines had no flushing system as we know it today, but constant water flow through underground channels meant things rarely lingered. The stream was fed by aqueduct runoff, bathhouse overflow, or diverted fountains. Ingenious, if a bit risky during droughts. You turn to the wall where graffiti covers the plaster in neat rows. Poems, insults, declarations of love, crude stick figures. One reads, "Here I sat and found my muse," while another simply states, "Don't trust Decimus." Sound advice. Of course, women didn't always have equal access to these public latrines. Some were designated for male use only, others were mixed. Wealthy women often used private home facilities or chamber pots emptied by slaves. But working-class Roman women, they adapted. Many used alleyway pots nearby facilities or coordinated trips during daylight hours for safety. The public toilet wasn't just a place, it was a system wrapped in class, gender, and geography. You stand now, stepping carefully away from the bench, and note that the floor slopes ever so slightly toward a drainage channel. Designed with care like everything else here, Rome's obsession with water movement, even in its least glamorous form, remains impressive. And as you leave, a breeze drifts through the columns, carrying with it the faint scent of soap oil and humanity. The next person walks in without hesitation, sponge stick in hand, ready for their turn on history's most democratic bench. You stroll through a quieter alley now, the buzz of the forum replaced by the soft hiss of trickling water and a low, almost ominous gurgle. You're near another latrine, smaller, darker, tucked between two brick buildings, and this one holds a special curiosity. There, resting on the stone ledge near a dripping basin, sits a tersorium, a sponge on a stick. You'd hoped it was myth. It wasn't. The stick is worn smooth from use, the sponge a little too limp for comfort, and the vinegar basin nearby smells enthusiastic. You pause. The concept is straightforward. Wipe, rinse, return. But this particular latrine serves as a reminder that Roman hygiene came with very Roman logic. Why waste resources making something disposable when you can reuse it endlessly? Practical and mildly terrifying. What makes it even more unsettling is how common it was. Public restrooms rarely had partitions. Romans weren't especially shy, but you do wonder how many conversations were interrupted by someone shouting, "Hey, pass the sponge." Some latrines even had built-in grooves carved into the stone beneath the bench, where the sponge stick could be washed with running water flowing continuously. This created a self-cleaning loop which feels almost futuristic until you remember it was cleaning shared sponges. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread throughout the empire or limited to cities like Rome and Ostia. Some suggest wealthier citizens brought their own personal hygiene kits, wooden boxes with private sponges, while others insist everyone just made peace with the sponge. One surviving satirical poem even makes fun of a senator who refused to share. You'd think sanitation would be above ridicule. You'd be wrong. You wander toward a corner where a small inscription is carved into the brickwork, a set of cleaning instructions. It reads loosely: soak thoroughly, use softly, rinse twice. Respect the stick. There's a kind of resigned dignity to it, as if written by someone who'd just had enough. One particularly quirky note comes from the writings of a Roman doctor named Celsus. He recommended vinegar rinses as an antiseptic, but warned against using sour wine, which apparently caused burning discomfort. You file that away under medical advice you didn't ask for. And yet, despite all of this, there's something undeniably efficient about the system. The sponge on a stick was sustainable, required no paper, and worked in tandem with Rome's flowing water. It was even ergonomic. Sort of. A modern bidet has nothing on Roman commitment to reuse. You glance once more at the lonely sponge, still damp, resting on the edge of a marble basin with faded carvings of dolphins. Always dolphins. Was it meant to be comforting? Symbolic? Or just the ancient version of bathroom wallpaper? The sponge may horrify you, but it was a sign of Rome's genius at making even the most uncomfortable tasks into shared civic rituals. And like it or not, it's probably the most historically accurate image you'll take away from this walk. You exit the latrine and inhale deeply fresh air finally. A breeze rustles the ivy crawling up a nearby archway. You've survived the sponge section. You've passed the vinegar test. Congratulations. You're now officially initiated into the most intimate and reusable corner of Roman plumbing. You follow a winding path away from the sponge saga, stepping into a small plaza where laughter rings and pigeons scatter. The sound of gently splashing water draws your eyes toward a centerpiece. A tall public fountain where water bursts from carved marble mouths. Lions, dolphins, even a slightly smug-looking satyr. This is more than decoration. It's Rome's lifeblood gurgling straight from the aqueducts that still hum through the city's bones. You watch a man rinse grapes, a child dunk her arms, and an older woman fill a ceramic jug with practiced precision. The fountain is both functional and symbolic, clean water on demand, gifted by the state and the gods. You settle beside the edge of the basin. The stone is worn smooth by generations of elbows and amphorae. This is where news travels. Neighbors chat trade goods, share gossip. Someone complains about the baker raising his prices. Another brags about a cousin who got promoted to aqueduct maintenance. Prestige. Romans believed these fountains reflected the health of the empire. As long as water flowed clean, cold, and constant, so did civilization. If the flow stopped, something was wrong. Drought. Sabotage. Divine punishment. The people noticed. Always. The system behind it all is dazzling. A complex castellum, a distribution tank, sits quietly behind a nearby wall hidden from view. Inside, water from an aqueduct is divided into channels. Some for public fountains, others for private homes, if you paid for the privilege, and the rest for baths and latrines. Flow regulators carved from stone or lead ensured fair distribution. In theory, historians still argue how accurate those flow rates actually were. Evidence suggests elite families often bribed officials to redirect more water toward their villas, leaving poorer districts with reduced trickles. One senator was reportedly caught installing a secret pipe into the city's main fountain and fined a truly underwhelming amount. You walk around the fountain, marveling at the sculptural flair. Many Roman fountains featured gods or mythological scenes. Neptune riding dolphins, nymphs reclining among waves, or even Mars holding a dripping spear. It wasn't just plumbing, it was performance. Quirky fact time. Some fountains had drinking spouts shaped like animal heads, but others featured nozzles so oddly placed that water would spray directly into your chest if you weren't careful. One surviving inscription reads, "Stand back, she spits far." A warning. A joke. Both. You notice a smaller fountain in the corner of the plaza. It's a Nasoni, a little nose named for its curved spout that resembles a bent nose. It continuously pours water in a narrow stream ideal for filling cups or washing hands. Though the term came later, the design has lasted millennia and still exists in modern Rome. You bend down and trace the drainwork at the fountain's base. Channels lead away from it in carefully calculated slopes. The runoff doesn't just vanish, it's redirected to nearby gardens or even into sewers, ensuring no drop is wasted. Nothing in Rome flows aimlessly. As you sit back, you can almost hear the water whispering through the stone, a gentle, eternal rhythm. There's comfort in its predictability, beauty in its utility. Even the birds know it. A pair of sparrows flutter and splash and preen beneath the lion's mouth, utterly unbothered by centuries. The sun glints off the fountain's surface, casting golden reflections onto the nearby columns. In this moment, it's easy to believe the empire will last forever, because water still dances clean and free in the open air. You leave the plaza and duck into a narrow workshop alley where the musical splash of fountains gives way to the clink of tools and the occasional shout of a frustrated craftsman. Here, among the soot and smoke, lies the beating heart of Rome's most unsung heroes, the pipe makers. You pass a cluttered table where lengths of terracotta pipe lie drying in the sun. Their hollow tubes stacked like loaves of bread, slightly tapered to fit snugly end to end. Some are plain. Others are stamped with the maker's name, an early form of brand pride, or maybe just a way to blame someone when things leaked. Terracotta was the old standby. Cheap, durable if buried properly, and immune to lead poisoning. But it had its downsides: fragility for one. A careless footstep or the shifting of soil could crack a line and send an entire district into waterless despair. Still, in cities across the empire, terracotta piping brought water to kitchens, baths, gardens, even temples. It was the quiet backbone of urban life. You turn a corner and find another workspace, this one dimly lit and guarded by the sharp scent of molten metal. Inside, a group of workers ladles liquid lead into shallow molds. It hisses as it cools. These are fistulae lead pipes, more flexible, more fashionable, and significantly more dangerous. One worker files a pipe's edge, smooth, his hands gray with lead dust. You watch as he lines up a row of sections, hammering them into a tight curve for a villa's bathing room. The effort is precise, almost elegant, except for the part where everyone here is probably slowly being poisoned. Historians still argue about the scale of lead pipe use. Some claim it was ubiquitous. Others say it was reserved for elites. One thing's certain: bronze and terracotta survived the centuries better. Lead pipes exposed to water and time often dissolved, leaving ghost tunnels behind. But where they did survive, they left clues. Chemical signatures, flow patterns, and the occasional inscription like, "From the property of Gaius Julius Hyginus, do not tamper." One quirky story from Pompeii tells of a villa where bronze pipes were replaced with lead because thieves kept stealing the bronze for resale. Lead wasn't just a plumbing material, it was theft deterrent. Who'd risk back pain and melted shoes for second-rate scrap? You crouch beside a test channel where workers pour water into connected pipe segments, watching for leaks. If one appears, they seal it with pitch clay, or sometimes melted lead, dripped from a ladle. The result? A water system that, if not eternal, was at least dependable for a decade or two. Next to the test channel sits a pile of curved connectors, angled pieces that allowed pipes to turn corners, go uphill, or snake under thresholds. Romans didn't invent pipe fittings, but they might have perfected them. Some fittings were beautifully cast. Little wings, laurel patterns, even inscriptions of water deities. Because if your plumbing's going to kill you slowly, it might as well look divine doing it. As you leave the alley, you glance back and catch sight of a wall sketch. A cartoonishly large rat drinking from a pipe with a tiny wine goblet. Someone, it seems, had a sense of humor about their job. The hum of molten metal fades behind you. Ahead, the city pulses, unaware of the hidden veins that carry its lifeblood. Pipes often buried, sometimes glorified, always crucial. Whether terracotta, bronze, or slowly deadly lead, they carried the empire's ambitions quietly, persistently, one gurgle at a time. You weave back into the sunlight, and this time the street is quieter, more domestic. Laundry hangs between upper balconies, bread bakes behind stone walls, and somewhere you hear the gentle swish of water being poured from a clay jug into a cistern. But look closely beneath this humdrum surface is an invisible workforce making all of this run. Rome's silent water stewards. These were the aquarii latrine attendants, cistern keepers, and plumbing slaves, the hands behind the hygiene. You walk past a modest doorway, where one such worker once lived, their name lost to history, but their labor still written in every drop that reached a fountain or flushed away waste. Rome had a highly stratified water system. Yes, aqueducts, pipes, and fountains did the heavy lifting, but someone had to climb down the pipes when they clogged. Someone had to drain the bathhouse tanks. Someone had to clean the public latrines when the sponge-wielding masses left behind more than civic pride. You duck into a narrow service corridor beside a public bathhouse. Its hot steam lingers along the walls. Here a slave once tended the hypocaust, the underfloor heating system. They stoke the fire day and night, feeding it with wood while ash and sweat collected on their arms. If the fire died, the entire bathhouse lost its warm water, and a very irate nobleman probably started shouting about standards. These heating slaves often worked in claustrophobic crawl spaces, inhaling smoke and soot. They were the HVAC technicians of antiquity, except unpaid, unseen, and expected to never speak unless spoken to. One graffiti scrawl scratched near a hypocaust chamber in Ostia simply reads, "Still alive." You feel that above-ground water carriers were a common sight in districts that lacked direct plumbing. They trudged uphill with amphorae, balanced on yokes, refilling household cisterns or delivering jugs to those too old or frail to carry their own. Their pay was meager, their backs ached, but without them, even the finest villa ran dry. And then there were the latrine cleaners who didn't just empty chamber pots. They had to scrub bench seats, clear clogged channels, and deal with those truly harrowing days when the cloaca maxima decided to belch. We don't often imagine a Roman gagging in waist-high sewage, but someone did that job, probably whistling or muttering. Historians still argue how these workers were organized. Were they enslaved, contracted laborers, guild members? Did some specialize in certain materials, bronze versus terracotta, or were they simply assigned wherever the pipes screamed loudest? The truth is murky, like much of what flowed beneath the city. One quirky inscription in a bathhouse reads, "If you see Flavius, thank him. He unblocked the hot drain during the fire." It's unclear what fire, what drain, or what horrifying soup of boiling filth Flavius endured, but someone remembered. And that's something. You pass a locked utility hatch and listen. Behind it, water rushes through lead veins, perhaps laid by slaves, tended by servants, and used by senators who never gave it a second thought. Yet the system ran because someone kept it alive. Rome was full of statues, honoring generals and emperors, but not a single monument stands for the person who prevented cholera that one summer by fixing the overflow trench. You nod quietly to the unnamed engineers, the barefoot cleaners, the sweat-soaked stokers. You may never know their names, but every clean fountain, every steaming bath, every flushed toilet of ancient Rome was their legacy. You step through a marble colonnade into a grand courtyard where torchlight flickers off damp stone. A festive air hangs in the space. Torches, lit garlands, strung voices raised in song. You've arrived during a religious festival. And while the crowd's attention is focused on offerings and oracles, something beneath their feet is quietly rebelling. You smell it before you hear it. A faint sourness, a hiss, then a burp from the drains. Someone shouts. A priest stumbles back from the altar as a rivulet of grayish water, definitely not holy, slinks its way out from behind the temple steps. A nearby celebrant slips, recovers, and glares at the floor, as if betrayal should only happen from people, not pipes. Welcome to one of ancient Rome's less publicized disasters: accidental indoor plumbing failure during sacred rites. This wasn't uncommon. The more complex the plumbing, the more chances for things to go hilariously or horrifically wrong. Most major temples had drainage systems built beneath them, clever networks that carried away rainwater ritual washings and other spiritual residues. But during festivals, especially large ones like Saturnalia or Lupercalia, when crowds swelled and sacrificial runoff was high, the systems could back up, You follow a narrow tunnel where attendants scramble with rags and buckets trying to divert the flood. A bronze valve is being hammered shut with a sandal, always a good sign. Somewhere, a sacrificial bull is bellowing, likely unaware that the temple's spiritual plumbing has revolted mid-prayer. Historians still argue whether this type of overflow came from design flaws or maintenance neglect. Some believe temple priests intentionally reduced drain sizes to collect and reuse holy water. Others suggest the pipes were just never meant for crowds of drunk Romans trying to pour wine back to the gods via the floor. One quirky artifact found near a temple in southern Italy, a stone basin with a built-in false drain. It looked like it would carry water away, but led nowhere, just a shallow cavity. Archaeologists believe it was used for show to give the appearance of ritual cleanliness, while keeping the blessed fluids for private reuse. Ancient performance plumbing. You peek behind the temple's raised platform and find a hidden drain priest, not an official title, but this man seems dedicated to unclogging the sacred trench with a hooked stick, and a lot of whispered apologies to the goddess. He glances at you briefly, shrugs, and keeps working. Above ground, the ceremony presses on. Musicians play. Incense wafts. A child dips their fingers into a basin with possibly more sewer content than symbolism. Nobody's quite sure if the holy water's been diluted, but nobody asks either. This blending of sacred and sewage wasn't unique. Many temples had subterranean plumbing just like villas or bathhouses, channels carved into the foundation lined with lead or terracotta designed to carry water and other things to the cloaca maxima. But unlike private homes, these had to handle blood wine oil and ash substances not known for their drain-friendly qualities. And when it failed spectacularly. One temple's records mention a day of divine dampness when a newly installed fountain overflowed and turned the sacred courtyard into a mud pit. The statue of Minerva reportedly leaned forward the next morning, slightly off-center perhaps, from embarrassment. You move toward the temple's side exit, stepping carefully over sand now hastily scattered to soak up overflow. Behind you, the hymns continue. The worshippers are either unfazed or simply choosing not to notice the rising tide of sacred seepage. For all their architectural brilliance, the Romans couldn't always outsmart water. It flowed where it wanted. It backed up when it liked. And sometimes even the gods had to hold their noses. You emerge from the temple chaos and walk downhill, drawn by the scent of warm stone eucalyptus oil and an unmistakable waft of sweat-soaked conversation. A grand colonnaded facade rises ahead, arched windows steam ghosting through slatted vents, and the gentle splash of water echoing from within. You've reached one of Rome's most beloved institutions, the public bathhouse. Inside it's alive. Not noisy exactly, but filled with layers of sound. Sandals on mosaic ladles dipping into basins, low murmurs about politics, and the occasional slap of a massage. The air is humid but comforting, like a warm fog scented with bay leaves and ambition. You cross into the apoditerium, the changing room where citizens of all ranks leave their tunics in open cubbies. Slaves stand by to watch them, not to guard the clothes, though theft happened, but to ensure nobody smuggles contraband soap. Bathhouse etiquette was serious business. The plumbing here is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Water seeps invisibly through walls, bubbles up from pools, and disappears into discreet channels beneath the floor. Each room, frigidarium, cold, tepidarium, warm, and caldarium hot, has its own flow system precisely engineered and constantly monitored. Beneath your feet, a hippocaust system roars to life. Fire burns in chambers below, and heated air rises through hollow bricks to warm the floor and walls. Water is piped in from rooftop cisterns or redirected from aqueducts, then funneled through lead terracotta or bronze lines to the various baths. It's a marvel of thermal logistics. And more importantly, it means you never have to bathe in cold water unless you want to. Historians still argue whether baths were truly hygienic or just germ exchanges with nicer lighting. Some praise their water circulation. Others point to the communal sponges and skin oil scrapers strigils shared among dozens of patrons. Either way, Romans believed in the ritual of cleanliness, even if modern microbiologists might faint. You pass into the caldarium where thick steam clings to the painted ceiling. A pair of senators debate tax reforms in hushed tones as they ladle warm water over themselves. Nearby, a young athlete scrubs his arms with a mixture of sand and oil, a kind of exfoliation that doubles as a statement. I can afford imported olive. Water drains along shallow channels under the benches, flowing into sediment filters before being discharged. Attendants monitor the flow rate using small slots carved into the walls. If the water runs too slow or too fast, they'll adjust a valve reroute pressure or shout at a boy with a jug somewhere upstream. Plumbing in here isn't just about luxury, it's a balancing act. One quirky fact: some bathhouses had dedicated urine rooms where ammonia-rich deposits were collected for use in laundry. Nothing was wasted, not even the worst of bodily functions. These facilities were usually near the rear entrance, far from the perfumed lounges, and hopefully downwind. You step into the tepidarium, the warm central room, and breathe deeply. The scent here is more subtle: amber rose oil and limestone. A group of women discuss the latest gladiator match while applying perfumed balms. Their water comes from special copper pipes said to preserve heat better than lead. Or maybe it just sounds fancier. Romans loved a good plumbing myth. Mosaic murals cover the floor. Dolphins, vines, sun gods pouring water from urns. Beneath those mosaics, a network of tiny channels, some no wider than your thumb, directing water like blood vessels beneath marble skin. And if the baths closed early, water still flowed overnight, flushing the pools, feeding fountains outside, and keeping the system from stagnating. That's right. Even at night, plumbing didn't sleep. As you step into the frigidarium, water cold enough to wake Caesar from a nap shocks your ankles. Patrons gasp and laugh, and in the echo of their voices, the splash of disciplined water and the soft hum of hidden heat, you realize bathing in Rome wasn't just cleansing, it was theater. It was plumbing with a pulse. You dry off mentally at least, and step outside the bathhouse into the crisp morning air of a provincial Roman town. The cityscape is smaller, humbler than Rome, but familiar in its layout. Grid-patterned streets, tiled rooftops, and the ever-present background sound of water moving through unseen channels. Here, far from the capital, plumbing takes on a more improvised personality. You walk along a worn road in Lutetia, modern-day Paris, though the Romans would have scoffed at the idea of naming it that. This was a Roman town with Roman pride and Roman plumbing, or a plucky imitation of it. To your left, a vendor ladles hot stew into bowls, his hands stained with smoke and steam. To your right, a woman empties a small pot into a stone-lined gutter and sprinkles ash after it. Practical, smelly, very local. Here in the provinces, indoor plumbing was a suggestion, not a guarantee. Wealthy homes might have a private latrine or a cold bath fed by a local spring, but most citizens relied on bucket chains, networks of laborers, family members, or just yourself carrying water from nearby wells or public fountains back to your home. No aqueduct spanned majestic arches here. Water was community-sourced, backbreaking, and often spilled. You follow a muddy track toward a villa perched on a slight hill. Its roof angles into a wide basin, collecting rainwater into underground cisterns. The system is simpler than Rome's no aqueduct, no valve-tapping engineers, but it works. Gravity slope and good tiling. Sometimes that's all it takes. Inside the villa, a narrow clay pipe winds from the cistern to a shallow kitchen basin where a slave girl scrubs lentils. The flow is slow but steady. A small channel carved into the stone countertop redirects excess water into a side yard where herbs grow wild. It's plumbing, with personality. Historians still argue whether these systems were standardized or entirely improvised. Some archaeologists insist there were manuals copied from Rome and adapted for rural use. Others believe every villa was a patchwork. Whatever materials were available shaped with local know-how and fixed when not, if it leaked. You pass a public fountain, clearly a centerpiece in the town square. It's smaller than Rome's and the water pressure varies. One spout dribbles while another sprays like a startled goose. The basin is chipped, patched with lead and bits of ceramic. Still, it functions. Children play nearby. A soldier rinses blood from his sandals. life continues. A quirky feature catches your eye. A stone marker embedded beside the fountain carved with a half-legible message. Property of the 9th cohort. Tampering is treason. Apparently, someone took water distribution very seriously. You glance behind a local tavern and see an outhouse-style latrine perched over a small drainage ditch. It's open to the air with a rough wooden bench and a curious string of dried leaves nailed nearby. Nature's toilet paper. Or just very confused decor. Hard to say. The town doesn't pretend to be Rome. It's not trying to impress with marble spouts or gold-trimmed drains. But its plumbing cobbled together with clay shards worn bronze and hard-earned grit keeps it alive. Rain gets captured. Waste gets carried off. Water with a little patience finds its way. You walk back toward the forum, passing another home with a barrel at the edge of the roof. A hole in the tile drains directly into it. A chicken drinks from the runoff. It's not elegant. It's not sacred. But it works. Rome exported its architecture, its roads, its politics, but plumbing. Plumbing was interpreted. Every town made it their own, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes badly. And still water flowed. Not always in straight lines, but always downhill. You leave the quiet rhythm of provincial pipes and head toward the outskirts of a Roman military encampment where efficiency rules, and no one cares if your marble basin has chipped corners. If Rome was proud of its cities, it was obsessed with its legions, and that included their plumbing. The camp sits in tidy rows. Tents and barracks laid out like a chessboard. Ditches dug precisely, walkways raked. And near the edge you spot it. The latrine, the Roman army's answer to mass sanitation. Simple, brutal, and if you're being honest, surprisingly effective. You approach the latrine, a long trench with a wooden bench stretched above it. There's no roof, just the open sky and a well-placed windbreak wall to spare the soldiers a draft. Small channels divert water from a nearby stream into the trench, helping to flush the contents away. Another trickle diverted from a second channel feeds a small trough in front of the bench. Yes, for cleaning sponge sticks even here. Military latrines weren't luxurious, but they were standardized. Every permanent camp had them. And not just toilets, also bathhouses, fountains, and water distribution networks. A Roman soldier was expected to march 20 miles and then install a functional sewer line before sundown. Because nothing builds morale like not having to relieve yourself in the bushes for the 100th time. You wander over to the bathing area, a low rectangular building with vents cut into the stone. Steam curls from within. Soldiers file in, strip down, and splash cold water over their limbs before entering the heated section. No murals here. No nymphs. Just hot stone, loud voices, and a very large copper boiler fed by logs. Inside, the water runs through portable bronze piping connected like puzzle pieces and easy to pack up when the Legion moved. Historians still argue how mobile these setups truly were. Some suggest bathhouses were only installed in long-term camps, while others believe even short-term encampments had basic wash stations with pipes routed through clay-lined trenches. A quirky detail catches your eye, a soap dispenser carved from an old amphora. The bottom is lopped off, and a thick paste of ash and fat oozes from the top. One soldier rubs it onto his arms like he's polishing a shield. Another complains it smells like goat. Cleanliness was a Roman military virtue, not just for health but for discipline. Dirty soldiers meant low morale. Low morale meant rebellion. And besides, lice didn't care about patriotism. Nearby, a water cart rumbles in from a local stream barrel strapped to its sides. The aqueduct. A soldier tasked with water detail hops down and begins refilling the cisterns connected to the bathing and cooking areas. You don't envy him. His job is quiet, repetitive, and entirely crucial. He gets no glory, no laurels, but without him, the entire camp smells like defeat. Another soldier walks by with a slop bucket and empties it into a trench lined with crushed charcoal and ash, an early attempt at filtration. The trench runs downslope, carefully dug so that waste flows away from the living quarters. Every detail from the slope of the land to the placement of water lines is mapped with almost architectural zeal. You lean on a post and watch as a young recruit trips over a sponge bucket, curses the engineering, and gets laughed at by veterans. One claps him on the back and says, "At least it's not Gaul. We had to build drains in snow." Rome's military plumbing wasn't about comfort. It was about order. It brought structure to the chaos of conquest. It ensured survival in muddy outposts and desert stations. It taught every soldier from lowly recruit to centurion that water and waste must flow with purpose. You take one last look at the latrine now steaming faintly in the morning light. It may not be glorious, but it's cleaner than you'd expect, and in a few minutes it'll be cleaned again. You leave the scent of pine-scrubbed latrines behind and follow a wide marble staircase up toward the imperial palace, where plumbing becomes less about survival and more about spectacle. This isn't just about flowing water anymore. It's about making it whisper your name while it glides through your indoor fountain of imported fish. You step into the Domus Augustana, one of the many palatial complexes on the Palatine Hill. The view overlooks the Circus Maximus, but your attention is drawn to something more subtle, the sound of water flowing gently from somewhere behind the walls. It's the Emperor's plumbing, and it doesn't just work, it performs. Inside the atrium, marble gleams underfoot, and a bronze dolphin fountain sprays water in perfectly arching jets. The source, a hidden pipe fed from a private spur of the Aqua Claudia aqueduct just for the palace. Because if you're emperor, you don't share your plumbing. A servant passes carrying a silver pitcher filled from an indoor tap. Yes, a tap. A bronze lever opens the pipe, allowing water to flow on command. This isn't some back alley cistern trickle. This is controlled, pressurized, regulated flow. With flair, you're guided through to the private baths, where a room nearly the size of a temple contains a caldarium, tepidarium, and frigidarium, all fed by separate channels. The hot water pipes are sheathed in brick-lined conduits insulated to retain heat. Cold water is channeled through ceiling-fed bronze lines to cascade like rain. You reach out to touch one. It's cool, precise, and just a little smug. Historians still argue whether emperors actually bathed here often or preferred more rural retreats. But the plumbing, undeniably imperial. Evidence suggests that engineers installed emergency overflow valves, trapdoor cisterns, and even steam release vents, early HVAC, if you're feeling generous. You pass through a toilet chamber that puts everything you've seen before to shame. The seat is carved from polished marble inset with ivory patterns. A gold-plated sponge stick holder rests nearby, and a poem is etched into the wall in elegant Latin cursive. Roughly translated, "Even the gods kneel here," subtle. And then there's the imperial garden fountain. You walk outside and it catches your breath, a long channel of flowing water filled with fish lilies and marble turtles that spray mist through their mouths. The emperor's guests would recline nearby, dipping fingers in, while musicians played and slaves ladled chilled wine from a side pool cooled by aqueduct-fed water. A quirky inscription carved into the rim of the fish pool reads, "The water tastes sweeter after conquest." It's unclear whether this is a metaphor or a very literal brag about pillaging better plumbing systems from foreign lands. Both are equally Roman. A small side room contains something even more astonishing. Underfloor fountains. Channels carved beneath translucent tiles allow water to flow visibly beneath your feet. An ancient lava lamp or a high-stakes flooring feature depending on your clumsiness. And above it all, a miniature aqueduct runs within the palace walls, arched and painted purely decorative, but functional enough to whisper, "Look what I can afford." You step into the Imperial Library, where a basin at the center of the reading hall allows scholars to wash their hands before handling scrolls. A small dolphin spout murmurs into the stone bowl. Clean hands, clean knowledge. Even here, water was more than a necessity. It was a symbol, a flex, a whisper of power in the hush of empire. Rome conquered the world and then rerouted the streams to flow through its hallways. You leave the palace descending the hill as the sun catches the mist of a distant spray. Behind you, water glides on behind marble above fire and through gold-lined valves, always flowing. Always watching. You leave the polished splendor of the imperial plumbing behind stepping back into the world of mortals and into a narrow street that smells suspiciously like yesterday's stew. Above, clay pipes jut from second-story windows, and if you listen closely, you can hear a soft splash and then silence. A woman leans out of her insula window and dumps the contents of a chamber pot into the street below. You step back just in time. She doesn't shout a warning. Maybe she used to. Maybe she got tired. Welcome to the world of night soil, where the elegant marble drains of palaces give way to the reality of apartment living. In Rome's densely packed tenement buildings, plumbing wasn't a convenience, it was mostly absent. Most insulae didn't have built-in toilets or running water, especially the upper floors. Residents either used chamber pots or hiked down multiple flights to reach shared latrines in the courtyard, or more often, the street corner. And if that sounds inconvenient, it was. Especially in the dark, especially in a toga. You walk under one of these buildings now, dodging laundry lines and suspicious puddles. A row of pots rests by a stairwell. Some are empty, others. Let's just say they haven't been emptied yet. A slave boy carries two toward the Cloaca Maxima, sloshing slightly as he navigates the stones. You don't envy him. Interestingly, some residents paid extra for portable waste collection services, a cart that came by in the morning to empty pots and haul the contents to compost heaps or outlying fields. Historians still argue whether this was an official service or more of an entrepreneurial venture by desperate teenagers. The Romans had a term for it. Sterquilinium, meaning a dung heap or a place to dump waste. There were rules about where you could and couldn't dump, typically not in the main street, though enforcement was famously lax. One quirky law from the Digest of Roman Law states that if someone dumps waste out a window and injures someone, they're liable, unless it was raining, in which case it's considered a natural hazard. You take a moment to process that logic and maybe find a hat. You peek into a side alley and find a drainage ditch lined with stone and gently sloped toward the larger sewer system. Some of these alleys were deliberately engineered to act as runoff channels, others just evolved that way. Either way, when the rains came, it was less refreshing downpour and more communal rinse cycle. In wealthier insulae, some landlords installed shared privies on the lower floors, essentially indoor latrines connected to simple pipes. These were often fed by rooftop cisterns activated by hand, but they were rare, prone to blockage, and in case of an earthquake or bad plumbing day, liable to explode backward. Yes, that happened. One notorious incident recorded by Pliny the Elder involved a minor eruption of sewer gas that dislodged a toilet seat and singed a senator. He didn't elaborate, probably for the best. You watch as a woman tosses gray dishwater into the gutter, then wipes her hands on her apron. Her toddler pees into a flower pot. A dog drinks from a puddle that may or may not be rainwater. The smells, the sights, the sound of bubbling runoff. It's a portrait of Roman urban life. Improvised, chaotic, but somehow functional. Despite all this, Romans considered their city advanced, and it was by ancient standards. But here, on the edge of convenience, you see what happens when population outpaces infrastructure, and when lead-lined dreams don't reach the top floor. You step aside as another chamber pot is dumped, and as you do, you glance up at the buildings 5-6 stories high. Each floor represents a level of plumbing privilege. Ground floor, maybe a real pipe. Top floor, bring a bucket. Rome was many things: glorious, sprawling, ambitious. But when it came to waste, gravity always had the final word. You retreat from the alley nostrils, grateful for even mildly fresher air, and find yourself near the Tiber River, where a low rumble beneath your feet signals something troubling. You pause at a small plaza and see water pooling at the base of a statue, definitely not from rain. Then you hear it again, a low, angry gurgle from a nearby drain. This is one of those days when the plumbing fights back. Rome's sewers were vast, clever, and mostly effective. But when it rained too hard, when the Cloaca Maxima got overburdened, or when waste volume outpaced the water supply, everything reversed direction. A young boy dashes past you barefoot, shouting, "It's happening again." He leaps over a puddle, narrowly avoiding the jet of brown-gray fluid now bubbling up through a street grate. You sidestep instinctively. This wasn't rare. Romans knew the smell. They had phrases for it. The sewer's speaking, or the river has turned on us. The Tiber, majestic and wide, was the city's primary drainage exit, and when it rose, everything backed up. Literally, you step cautiously onto a raised curb watching as a pair of sandals float slowly past. A shopkeeper scrambles to seal the base of his doorway with cloth and bricks. Some used waxed boards, others stuffed sacks into the doorframe. One unlucky vendor is sweeping what appears to be a full olive barrel's worth of slop out of her wine cellar. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima had check valves to prevent backflow. Some surviving segments suggest primitive flap systems, others rely on slope and volume. But when the Tiber flooded, and it did, those safeguards might as well have been myths. A particularly quirky case comes from the records of Augustus's reign. During a festival, the sewers backed up so violently that a fountain meant to honor Neptune sprayed mud and foulness across the forum. Rather than cancel the ceremony, they draped the statue in perfumed garlands and called it an omen of abundance. Spin doctors even then. You inch your way to a public fountain hoping it's still clean. Miraculously, it is fed from a separate line, higher pressure. But downstream, the lower channels are fully compromised. Latrine outflows runoff from butcher's stalls, even bathhouse backwash. Everything converges and rises together. A group of bathhouse slaves arrives carrying wooden poles and bundled rags. Their job: sewer runners. When the system backed up, these men would descend into the access tunnels and try to clear blockages manually sometimes, while waist-deep in increasingly aggressive runoff. They carried long rods to poke and prod clogs and brass lanterns to spot rats. You salute them in your mind, or maybe in pity. The stench thickens as the wind shifts. People are calm, surprisingly. This isn't a disaster. It's a routine sewage uprising like laundry day or tax collection. Everyone works around it, rerouting drains, lifting skirts, timing street crossings between spurts. Rome didn't stop for a little backflow. You find yourself near a statue of Cloacina, goddess of sewers half obscured by climbing ivy and water stains. A faded offering dish lies at her feet filled with wilted flowers and a single coin. It feels appropriate. Even divine plumbing has its limits. Above you, the city carries on merchants haggling, senators gossiping, a woman arguing with her donkey. Below, a rebellious network of ancient engineering trying its best to hold the line. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But either way, the Romans always flushed forward. You push uphill now, away from the bubbling drains and into a quieter residential district where vines creep up sun-drenched walls and laundry sways in the breeze. The streets are narrower here, quieter. A cat suns itself beside a chipped fountain. Somewhere behind closed shutters, someone laughs softly. And then you hear the creak of a door, followed by hushed voices. Two women wrapped in shawls stepping out into the alley with clay jars in hand. They glance around not for safety, but for privacy. Because here in the back streets of Rome, plumbing was never truly neutral, especially not for women. You follow them unobtrusively down a narrow path to a communal fountain tucked between buildings. It's smaller than the ones in the forums, with just a single spout trickling water into a basin stained with moss and mineral streaks. The women fill their jars and chat in low tones, family news, food prices, whether the new boy at the bakery is married. This moment, this place. This is where women found a sliver of autonomy in the city's plumbing system. In Roman society, access to water wasn't always equal. Wealthy women, of course, had private baths, indoor toilets, and slaves to fetch clean and heat water for them. But working-class women, freed women, and servants, they waited in line. They carried jugs. They navigated plumbing with the same precision and caution as they did the rest of public life. Historians still argue whether women were officially restricted from certain bathhouses or simply discouraged by custom. Some evidence suggests specific hours or separate entrances. Others describe mixed-gender facilities where social norms were looser and sometimes more dangerous. Graffiti from Pompeii warns women to bring a friend when visiting the baths near dusk. A grim, familiar note in a marble city. But there were victories. Some communities built women-only fountains maintained by priestesses or midwives. These were often located near temples to Juno or Diana, framed with symbols of fertility and purity. You spot one now barely more than a stone trough, but carved with intertwined vines and a small relief of a woman pouring water from an urn. A quirky artifact found near one such fountain, a hairpin etched with the words, "She went alone, but not unseen." A warning, a boast, maybe both. You step inside a modest home nearby a widow's villa preserved in the city's ash and memory. Inside a corner chamber contains a private bathing space, a single bench, a deep ceramic basin, and a stubby bronze pipe poking from the wall. Likely fed by a rooftop cistern, the pipe would have delivered just enough pressure for washing. Never luxury. The walls are painted with faded frescoes, women gathering herbs, pouring water into vases, lighting incense. There's no grand hypocaust here, just a hearth, a basin, and dignity. You touch the edge of the water basin, cool even in this summer heat, and think about the daily rituals of Roman women, carrying water, heating it, scrubbing linens by hand, then washing themselves with what little remained. Each act a choreography of patience and strength. Some women used perfumed oils to soften their skin after scrubbing stored in tiny glass flasks hidden in the folds of their tunics. Others made do with ash and rough cloth. Cleanliness wasn't just physical. It was social, spiritual, even political. You exit back into the alley. The two women you followed earlier are gone now, their jars full, their conversation finished. Life continues. Quiet, resilient, unseen by statues or scrolls. Rome's plumbing may have been engineered by men funded by emperors and managed by slaves, but in the spaces between, in the daily echoes of buckets and footsteps, women made it their own. You head toward the Subura district now, Rome's notorious neighborhood of shadowed alleys overlapping balconies and rumors whispered between shutters. But today you're not here for scandal. You're here for something far stranger, a tiny shrine tucked between a butcher's shop and a stairwell where the people of Rome worshipped. A pipe, yes, a literal pipe, or rather, the spirit inside the pipe. Welcome to the bizarre and strangely comforting world of gutter gods and drain spirits, where plumbing wasn't just practical, it was divine. You kneel beside the shrine built no taller than your hip, with a blackened stone basin and a small terracotta figurine of a wrinkled old man pouring water from a cracked jug. Coins sparkle in the basin. A few wilted herbs lie nearby. Above it, painted in now faded ochre, are the words, "To the spirit of flow who keeps waste away." Romans were deeply superstitious, and their plumbing reflected it. While temples had formal dedications and priesthoods, the city's plumbing infrastructure had its own pantheon of household spirits, minor deities, and lares cloacini, guardians of the drain. You pass another building where a drain pipe curves like a snake, and someone has tied red string around its opening. A protection charm. Some believed these spirits, called mains, lived in water conduits and had to be placated, especially during renovations. Move a pipe without offering wine. You might wake the flow demon. No one wanted to deal with that smell. Historians still argue whether these rituals were superstition or symbolic maintenance. Was it faith or just habit? We may never know. But in one Roman manual on household duties, there's an actual instruction. When repairing the water exit, offer honey to the mouth of the pipe. Whisper your request, then seal the joint. Plumbing, with diplomacy. You duck into a cellar where a small catch basin has been carved from stone. Above it, a crude mask with bulging eyes and a puckered mouth grimaces from the wall. Not decoration. This was a warding face believed to scare off mischievous spirits that might clog the waterway or cause backflow. You can almost hear it sneer. Not today, sewer sprite. A particularly quirky discovery from a villa near Naples. A lead pipe engraved with the phrase, "Mine." Back off! Was it a legal warning? A joke? A prayer? Scholars are divided, but the tone feels unmistakably Roman. You step into another alley and see a tiny household altar where a servant sprinkles wine over a stone bowl. She murmurs something you can't quite catch. Maybe a thank you, maybe a plea, to keep the drains from backing up during tonight's dinner party. Even the Cloaca Maxima Rome's mighty central sewer had a shrine. Not metaphorical. A real temple right beside its yawning mouth. Here, Romans gave offerings to Cloacina, goddess of the sewer. Silver coins scented oils, even wreaths. One emperor allegedly tossed in a small gold statue to end a particularly nasty flood. It didn't help, but the gesture was appreciated. You pause at a curb where a cracked pipe dribbles faintly into a drainage channel. Someone has placed a sprig of rosemary in the crevice. You don't know who or when or why exactly, but it feels respectful, like tipping your hat to the ghost in the plumbing. For all their engineering brilliance, Romans never lost their sense of mystery. Water came from the gods. Waste went to the underworld. And between those two extremes, in every pipe pool, sponge and basin, something watched. Something flowed. Maybe that's why the city ran for so long, not just because of marble and math, but because the people believed their drains had souls. And maybe they weren't entirely wrong. You walk beneath the shade of an open colonnade, sandals tapping against the cool stone, and find yourself inside what looks like an ordinary storeroom until you notice the wax tablets stacked neatly on a shelf, the sharp scent of ink, and the sudden realization that you've entered the workshop of a plumbing inventor. Rome didn't just build big, they tinkered. And when it came to moving water in new ways, a few bold souls stepped beyond lead and terracotta to try and leave their mark. Some succeeded. Others ended up quite wet. You flip through one of the tablets. It's covered in neat Latin script diagrams and measurements. The title, A Proposal for the Channeling of Heated Vapors Beneath Sleeping Benches. It's signed. Marcus Fulvius, year 161 CE. A man with dreams of heated bedrooms and probably cold feet. Beside it sits a bundle of brass pipe segments carefully carved with threaded ends, an innovation well ahead of its time. Most Roman pipes were joined by sockets and pitch. But here, someone attempted a screw-in system, likely hoping for a tighter seal and easier replacement. Clever, heavy, possibly over-engineered. You pick up a small valve prototype, bronze and palm-sized, shaped like a lotus. The handle pivots smoothly. With it, water flow could be controlled more delicately, ideal for fountains or garden misters. There's a label scratched in beside it. For the house of the poet with sensitive ears. Historians still argue whether these kinds of plumbing inventions ever made it into common use. Many were patented in a Roman sense with official documentation and even court battles over water rights. But others faded into obscurity, abandoned after one too many pipe bursts or flooding mishaps. One quirky patent record survives from the reign of Hadrian. A man named Servius Tullius, no relation to the king, claimed he invented a self-filling basin. In truth, it was just a large bucket placed under a leaky pipe. The court dismissed his claim with a note that translates roughly to, "That is not invention. That is coincidence." But some ideas did catch on, like looped pressure systems where water was cycled through rooftop cisterns to build gravity-fed pressure, and early airlock traps to prevent bad odors from seeping up through drains. One bathhouse nearby even had a primitive steam diverter, allowing attendants to reroute heated vapor into different chambers, depending on time of day. Roman HVAC version 1. Tio. You spot a small statue in the corner, Minerva, goddess of wisdom, standing atop a coiled pipe. A tongue-in-cheek tribute, perhaps, to those who dared imagine better ways to pour heat and flush. You reach the back of the room and find a faded mural depicting a fountain shaped like a lion devouring a trumpet. Decorative, yes, but there's plumbing logic behind it. The trumpet channels water pressure upward before forcing it through the lion's mouth in a dramatic spray. Theater meets hydraulics. One dusty scroll lies unrolled on a nearby table, a half-finished sketch of what looks like... Is that a rotating bidet chair? You squint. It's unclear, but ambitious. The engineer's name is lost to time, but you picture a man enthusiastically pitching this to a bored senator over lunch. Outside, the sound of water flowing resumes its steady rhythm. You step out into the sunlight with a new appreciation for the silent inventors, those who dreamt of turning everyday plumbing into something remarkable. Their devices may have cracked, rusted, or been laughed out of bathhouses. But in each threaded valve, every sealed gutter, there was one simple, enduring hope. That water could be shaped to obey not just gravity, but imagination. You leave the inventors behind feeling inspired, and then instantly deflated as you step into a courtyard where a furious argument is already underway. Two men stand ankle-deep in a puddle that definitely isn't rain, shouting and gesturing wildly toward a newly installed lead pipe running into the wall of a townhouse. "Bronze, you promised," one man yells, jabbing a finger at the dull gray pipe. "This is lead. You swore it was bronze." Ah yes, the scammy builders of ancient Rome. Turns out plumbing wasn't always a noble profession. You hang back observing as the accused contractor raises his hands in protest. It's high-quality lead, he insists. Much easier to shape. No corrosion. Think of the savings. His client doesn't look convinced, especially not as the pipe begins to drip. Again. This was a recurring issue in ancient Rome. Plumbing was big business, and like all big businesses, it had its share of corner cutters, fraudsters, and cheap pipe dealers. Bronze was durable and safe but expensive. Lead was cheaper, more pliable, and quietly toxic, which meant if someone could pass off lead as bronze, they'd make a tidy profit. You crouch beside the pipe. It's clearly stamped with a barely legible name, L. Marius Candidus. Probably the manufacturer, or a decoy stamp. Some builders forged pipe stamps to imply official supply lines. One even claimed his lead came from the emperor's mines, until a particularly disgruntled senator had him arrested for plumbing treason. True story. Historians still argue whether Rome ever tried to regulate plumbing standards in any meaningful way. Evidence suggests the curators aquarum. The officials who managed water did inspect pipes, but only major systems like aqueducts and public fountains. Private homes. Buyer beware. You pass a wall where a patch of plaster has peeled away, revealing a web of mismatched pipes beneath terracotta joined, to lead with wax wrapped in cloth smeared with pitch. A plumber's nightmare. Or masterpiece. Hard to tell. One quirky complaint recorded in a surviving letter: "My bath no longer steams, and the noise from the wall is like an angry god boiling lentils." It's unclear what went wrong, but we're guessing something cracked. Further down the street, a small team of unlicensed pipe fitters work hastily in the early morning light. No uniforms, no official stamps, just tunics, sharp tools, and a lot of muttering. These were the freelancers of the plumbing world, fast, discreet, and paid in cash. They installed illegal taps into public fountains, diverted water from bathhouses, and sometimes rerouted sewer lines for an extra fee. Rome tolerated them, to a point. One crackdown ordered by Emperor Trajan involved branding rogue plumbers with the mark of the pipe, a curved scar on the forearm. Brutal. Ineffective. They came back with longer sleeves. You pause beside a villa with a pristine bronze spout shaped like a swan. It's beautiful, and beneath it, half hidden behind an ivy-covered wall, is a second pipe, short, squat lead. You look closer. It's feeding the same pool. One pipe for show, one for flow. Classic bait and switch. The more you look, the more you see. Tiny cheat taps sticking out of walls. Pipes with obvious repairs made from scrap cookware. Seals filled with wax and linen instead of proper putty. Rome's plumbing wasn't just a marvel, it was a business. And where there's money, there's always someone willing to sell you genuine bronze with a twinkle in his eye and a bag of lead behind his back. As you leave the argument behind, you continues. The buyer still wants bronze. The seller still insists he meant bronze-colored. And the pipe, still leaking. Some things never change. You drift down a quieter street now, leaving behind the shouting contractor and entering a stretch of Rome that feels layered. Not in architecture, but in smell. Something sweet, something sharp, something unmistakably alive. You wrinkle your nose, but there's no escaping it. This is the scent of empire. It's easy to romanticize Rome, the aqueducts, the marble, the public baths. But walking through this neighborhood, your senses remind you that plumbing in the ancient world didn't mean sterilized chrome and lemon-scented cleanser. It meant a constant negotiation with odors. You stop near a drainage grate and peer down. A slow, lazy trickle winds through it, carrying who knows what from who knows where. Beside it, a cluster of fruit vendors squats with baskets of figs, dates, and grapes. The air is thick, Fermented produce, cracked olive jars, and the subtle tang of iron-rich water. It's not bad, but it's not great. In Rome, everything flowed together. Waste, runoff, bathwater rain. And if you didn't design for smell, you got smell. Some wealthier households burned incense at floor level or sprinkled powdered herbs over their drains. One mosaic discovered in Pompeii even features the words, "Odor do not rise." Historians still argue whether Romans understood germ theory. They didn't, but they definitely understood stench theory. Bad smells weren't just unpleasant, they were dangerous. The miasma theory, which held that foul air caused disease, dominated medical thinking for centuries. So when the drains backed up, or a bathhouse got musty, it wasn't just a hygiene concern, it was health warfare. You pass a bathhouse where an attendant scatters dried bay leaves across the warm tile. Not for the gods, for the nose. Another sprinkles vinegar into the corner drains to settle the vapors. One even swings a censer full of rosemary ash over a particularly vocal toilet. A quirky trick used by some households. Hanging garlic ropes in the latrine. Not to ward off vampires, Rome had plenty of real monsters, but to mask the scent of communal usage. If you were poor, you might burn scraps of old cloth. If you were rich, maybe cinnamon bark. If you were unlucky, just hope for a strong wind. At a nearby fountain, you overhear two women debating whose bathhouse smells better. The one on Via Claudia uses lemon peel, one says. Lemon peel. The other scoffs. That's for funerals. You chuckle and turn toward a tannery, the city's worst offender. Tucked into the city's edge, tanners worked with animal hides, lime, and most infamously urine used to soften and bleach leather. The smell, legendary. So legendary, in fact, that tanneries were often placed downwind and downhill from residential neighborhoods, though that didn't always help. The waste ran straight into the Tiber. You can guess how that affected the fish. A surviving plumbing scroll from a bathhouse manager includes a full section on olfactory management. Suggestions include burning pine pitch in wall sconces, adding mint to cisterns, and frequent drain flushing with hot water. One line reads, "The nose is the judge. If it offends the nose, the bather leaves." You pause beside a tavern where a small copper funnel funnels excess wine into the street gutter. The mingling of spilled drinks, sweat meat drippings, and street runoff creates a bouquet that is uniquely Roman, complex, contradictory, and just a bit vinegary. Yet somehow, despite all this, the city works. Smells rise and fade. Water flows, then disappears. People adapt. You hear laughter, see children kicking a waxed leather ball across flagstones. Someone sells lavender oil. Someone else dumps dishwater into a cracked pipe. Rome smelled like life, loud, messy, unavoidable. Not always pleasant, but always real. You wander toward the portico of a modest library where a scholar sits with his scrolls, a tired frown on his face. As you approach, he sighs and mutters to no one in particular. They took everything from the Greeks except the good plumbing. Welcome to one of Rome's greatest love-hate relationships. Envy for Greek intellect, contempt for Greek bathrooms. You take a seat on a nearby bench as the scholar launches into a lecture that seems rehearsed more for pigeons than people. They had philosophers, yes, but chamber pots. Chamber pots. In the age of Aristotle, he gestures with a wax tablet so wildly that a group of passing students speeds up their pace. The truth, as always, is complicated. While the Greeks built aqueducts, cisterns, and even basic latrines as early as the Minoan era, they didn't invest in plumbing with quite the Roman flair. The Minoans had advanced toilets in Knossos, complete with gravity-fed flushing. But by the classical period, much of that ingenuity had eroded into more basic household solutions, buckets, pots, and public bathhouses that mostly focused on splashing, not sanitizing. Historians still argue whether this regression was due to economics' urban density or just philosophical disinterest in pipe maintenance. The Romans, by contrast, made plumbing a public and political virtue. Aqueducts were monuments, not just infrastructure. Lead pipes were stamped with official seals. Senators debated sewer expansions like modern politicians debate railways. It wasn't just about function, it was national pride. And yet some Roman thinkers were insecure about it. You open a scroll left on a ledge. It's a rant by Seneca, complaining that modern Romans cared more about warm baths than moral discipline. He probably had a heated pool in his villa. There's a quirky anecdote that floats through surviving letters. A Roman envoy visiting Athens once tried to explain public latrines and sponge sticks to a group of Greek philosophers. One replied, "The body may cleanse, but the mind recoils." Cultural differences in full force. You step into the library's courtyard, where a tiny ornamental fountain gurgles gently in the center. It's fed by a thin bronze pipe decorated with grapevines and a chubby satyr. Not Greek, very Roman. Water wasn't sacred here, it was stylized, practical, celebrated. In the far corner, you spot a Greek-influenced bath mosaic, likely imported, showing naked figures reclining beside a stream. It's elegant, sure, but you notice the absence of pipes in the depiction. Just a bowl, a jug, and a stream. Beautiful, but you wouldn't want to share it with 10 senators after dinner. Still, the Romans borrowed plenty. Greek ideas of hygiene as philosophy filtered into Roman thought. Balance of the humors. Cleansing the body as a reflection of virtue, but then they added underfloor heating and a citrus-scented sponge and called it a day. As you rise to leave the scholar spots, you there, do you know what Plato used as a bathtub? You shrug. A question bucket, he says dramatically. Then he coughs. Or maybe that was Diogenes. Point is, it wasn't marble. You walk away amused while behind you, the scholar mutters something about how no one appreciates a good latrine reference anymore. For all their borrowing, the Romans built something uniquely their own, a civilization where water obeyed rules, flowed in stone veins, and occasionally flooded your neighbor's garden if you didn't maintain the valve. They envied the Greeks' mines, but when it came to plumbing, they preferred to run their own pipes. You find yourself standing at the edge of a ruined villa, now a tourist curiosity, but once a stately home with running water, heating ducts, and decorative fountains. A tour guide nearby gestures to a cracked marble bench and cheerfully proclaims, "And this is where the Romans sat while doing their business, side by side." Charming. But what really catches your attention is a small roped-off alcove with a faintly familiar shape in the floor. A stone toilet. The seat has long since worn smooth. There's still a tiny channel beneath it, barely wider than your hand, and you realize you're staring at what archaeologists call a contextual mystery. Because the truth is, despite all the surviving artifacts, historians still argue about the toilets. You kneel beside the remains, careful not to cross the rope, and let your mind wander through the centuries. Did it flush with water diverted from the garden fountain? Did the drain connect directly to the sewer or just a cesspit? Did the family sit here in the morning discussing politics over prune dates? We don't know. Roman toilets remain a strange gray area between engineering fact and educated guesswork. For all their innovations in aqueducts, baths, and fountains, the nitty-gritty of daily toilet use is often poorly documented or lost in translation. Which pipe carried waste versus runoff? Was there always a sponge stick? What about upper-class privacy? One quirky excavation in southern Gaul revealed a latrine with a seashell embedded in the seat edge. Aesthetic. Personal hygiene tool. Or just a lost souvenir? No one's quite sure, but several experts wrote full papers debating it. Passionately, you circle the villa, noting where pipes once entered the kitchen, how the gutters slope toward a side courtyard, and how the toilet's outflow seems to vanish. No visible link to the Cloaca Maxima. No cistern above. Just a tiny ledge where a bucket might have sat. Some believe toilets were manually flushed water poured down by a servant or resident after use. Others suggest a trickle system where pipes from rooftop rain cisterns slowly leaked into the latrine, providing a constant, gentle rinse. Clever, but prone to failing in dry spells. Or in the case of particularly fiber-rich diets. You pass a placard quoting a Roman satirist. He thinks himself noble, yet his stool flows no faster than mine. Even in a status-driven society, everyone shared the same biological truths. But debate goes beyond mechanics. There's also the question of etiquette. Were toilets gender-separated? Did people converse while seated? How were emergencies handled when pipes backed up in the night? Modern reconstructions vary wildly. Some museum replicas show high-end toilets with privacy screens and sponge drawers. Others show wide-open benches with 15 holes in a row and zero modesty. Which is true? Probably both. Rome, like all cities, contained multitudes, from opulent villa bathrooms to filthy alley pots. Some days you had running water. Other days you muttered a prayer to Cloacina and hoped for the best. You step outside the ruins and pass another latrine basin, this one dry and cracked. Someone's tossed in a few coins. Maybe for luck, maybe in respect. Maybe they just mistook it for a wishing well. In the end, Rome's toilets remain a mosaic of partial clues and passionate arguments. Archaeologists still dig. Historians still publish papers titled things like drainage status and the elite bottom. A reinterpretation. It's all very serious and oddly beautiful, because even in something as mundane as plumbing, Rome reminds us that the past isn't a monologue. It's a conversation sometimes between two people sitting far too close on a stone bench, whispering about who forgot to refill the cistern. You follow a dusty trail leading out of the villa and into the open countryside, where the hum of the city gives way to birdsong and the distant creak of cartwheels. Here, beyond the city's crowded forums and layered sewers, Rome's most understated innovation quietly spreads its influence. Plumbing is empire export. You pass a construction site where a handful of soldiers and engineers squat beside a shallow trench-fitting terracotta pipe segments together. They're not in Rome. They're in Britannia, or Gaul, or North Africa. It's hard to tell. The architecture may shift, the accents may differ, but the pipes are unmistakably Roman. Wherever Rome went, its water systems followed. Not always grand aqueducts or public baths, but at least the bones of them. Cisterns, covered drains, brick-lined trenches, elevated gutters. Towns across the empire received blueprints, sometimes literal scrolls detailing how to route water for latrines, fountains, and garrison bathhouses. You crouch beside one of the soldiers as he applies pitch to the inside of a pipe joint. His hands are practiced. He's not an architect, just someone trained to build Rome, pipe by pipe. The lead engineer mutters about gradients, adjusting the slope with a flat stone. Too steep and the water rushes. Too flat and it stagnates. Precision in mud and clay. Nearby, a native village stands watch. A few elders observe the new construction with a mix of skepticism and awe. For them, this is sorcery water that obeys humans, travels underground, and arrives without effort. Some will adopt it. Others will avoid it entirely. Plumbing can be persuasive, but culture flows its own way. Historians still argue how widespread Roman plumbing really was beyond the Italian peninsula. In places like Spain and Syria, full aqueduct networks were constructed, some still in use today. In others, only fragments remain. A partial bathhouse, a sealed drainage tunnel, a rusted bronze tap. The intention was imperial unity, the result often patchwork practicality. One quirky inscription on a lead pipe fragment found in modern Germany reads, "Water for the gods and the goat," in that order. It's unknown if it was sincere or sarcastic. Either way, someone was hydrating both the divine and the livestock. You walk into a newly built provincial bath complex, its walls plastered with wet clay and lime. The hot room is still dry. The pipes not yet connected, but the layout is unmistakably Roman. Caldarium, tepidarium, frigidarium. Even here, hundreds of miles from the forum, people will soon discuss taxes and gossip, while steam fogs the glassless windows. Plumbing wasn't just comfort, it was Romanization. It brought identity, infrastructure, bragging rights. "We have pipes" became shorthand for "we belong to something bigger." Yet the locals didn't always take it at face value. In some regions, Roman latrines were repurposed into grain stores. Pipes were torn up to melt down for arrowheads. Aqueduct arches became goat shelters. People made Rome their own, just as Rome had tried to make them Roman. You sit on a half-finished bathhouse bench and glance around at the laborers. Romans, locals, freedmen, legionaries, hammering, digging ceiling. They're not building a monument. They're building routine. Places where people will wash, drink, relieve themselves, and maybe grumble about cold water pressure in Latin. The empire may stretch across 3 continents, but it shares a single truth. Everyone needs clean water. And everyone sooner or later must deal with what happens after. You rise and walk back along the trench, where water already dribbles from a test pipe. It slides through the clay like it belongs there. Rome didn't just conquer, it connected. With roads with law, and yes, with plumbing. You tread slowly through the ruins of a once grand villa, now little more than broken columns and vine-covered stones. Dust swirls with every step, and above you the sky feels heavier, as if even the air mourns. The roof is gone. The pipes are silent. Rome has fallen here. Welcome to the postscript of plumbing when the barbarians came and broke the pipes. It didn't happen all at once. No trumpet sounded as the aqueducts cracked. No official scroll declared, "The drains no longer work." But across the empire, as Roman authority retreated, so too did its delicate latticework of water systems. You peer down a collapsed pipe trench once lined with lead and terracotta. Now it's clogged with soil and tree roots, its careful slope warped by time and neglect. A fragment of bronze lies half buried, stamped faintly with an imperial seal. No one has touched it in centuries. The Gothic sack of Rome in 410 CE didn't just burn scrolls and loot temples. It tore apart the water infrastructure. Aqueducts were targeted, dismantled, or simply abandoned. Why maintain a pipe system when your city's walls are crumbling and your grain supply just vanished? You pass the remains of a public fountain, its basin dry, its lion head, spout snapped clean off. Children once splashed here. Now lizards dart across the cracked marble. A generation later, no one even remembered how it worked. Historians still argue how much of the decline was destruction versus decay. Some systems collapsed due to war. Others simply faded because no one had the training or the political will to maintain them. Plumbing is thankless when the empire is starving. In the absence of Rome's reach, local systems re-emerged. People drew water from wells again. Latrines were replaced with outhouses. The complex network of sewers and heated baths gave way to chamber pots emptied into the nearest ditch or river. The Middle Ages would eventually codify this with more wood, more buckets, and much, much less dignity. One quirky artifact from this transitional period, a monk's illustrated manual on how to dig a holy trench. It's half devotional text, half plumbing how-to, and includes advice like face east when constructing a pit that the Lord may shine upon your cleanliness. It's earnest. You step into what used to be a bathhouse caldarium, now a bird's nesting ground. The hypocaust floor is collapsed, but fragments remain, bricks blackened with centuries of forgotten fire. Somewhere beneath your feet, a maze of stone channels still exists. Waterless, choked with ash and moss, but undeniably Roman. One corner of the room contains a makeshift hearth, likely from squatters who moved in centuries later. They boiled stew where steam once rose. They slept beneath frescoes of Neptune and Venus, barely visible now. The plumbing remained even when the people forgot what it was. And yet, not everything was lost. The aqueducts, even in ruin, inspired future generations. Their arches became bridges. Their paths became roads. Monasteries preserved bits of engineering knowledge. Renaissance architects would one day rediscover what had once flowed so freely. But for centuries, the pipes went quiet. You look out over the countryside. Wild vines grow where fountains once sang. Rainwater pools in cracked cisterns, not because someone directed it, but because gravity still remembers. Rome's plumbing didn't disappear. It waited. And beneath every broken tile, every buried lead spout, every forgotten sponge stick basin, it whispered, "I was here. I worked until they let me break." You linger in the long silence of that broken bathhouse, then step through what was once a grand arched doorway, now a mossy gap, and make your way down a sloping path toward the Tiber. The air grows heavier again, and the smell. It's not of sewage this time. It's of mud decay and history trying not to drown. Because Rome's plumbing didn't just fade into obsolescence. Sometimes it fought back. The Cloaca Maxima, the very backbone of the city's sewage system, had a habit of reminding people it was still alive. You arrive at a low-lying district that centuries ago sat near the heart of the system's outlet. Back then, the Tiber would swell during storms, sometimes gently, sometimes catastrophically. And when it did, the Cloaca Maxima responded with what can only be described as a grudge. You step over the threshold of a ruined temple basement. It's damp. The floor is uneven, bulging in the middle where water once pressed upward. Remnants of carved drains still channel to a sunken trough, and nearby a bronze grate lies twisted beside a collapsed wall. You don't need a guide to guess what happened here. During Rome's decline, plumbing maintenance halted, but the cloaca kept flowing. Or rather, kept trying. Debris collapsed tunnels and invading root systems turned smooth channels into pressurized traps. And when the pressure couldn't go forward, it went up. Backups weren't slow. They were explosive. There are accounts, part legend, part civic complaint of drains vomiting sludge across entire streets. A scroll from the early 6th century describes a brown tide that struck the forum, and even the magistrates could not deny its scent. Historians still argue whether these incidents were engineering failures or acts of nature colliding with abandoned design. One camp insists poor sealing and lack of emergency bypasses doomed the system. Another believes it was simply time, that every stone has its limits, even when blessed by Cloacina herself. You walk beside a collapsed aqueduct tunnel, now its interior blocked with sediment. Tiny trickles still find their way through the cracks. You crouch and touch the damp stone. Cold, quiet, persistent. One particularly quirky tale tells of a monk in the 9th century who set up a chapel over a sewer vent, believing the warm air was a sign of divine presence. The congregation lasted 3 weeks until a backup surged through mid-sermon and declared the service over. But even as chaos reigned above ground, the plumbing systems underground didn't all die. Some sections survived silently, carrying runoff and spring water far beyond the fall of emperors. Rats scurried through them. Moss coated the walls. But the flow, weak, halting, stubborn, continued. You pass into a service tunnel rebuilt in the Renaissance, using bricks scavenged from the original Roman structure. Here, medieval engineers tried to reactivate the old systems. They mapped what was left. They patched. They guessed. And occasionally, they accidentally tapped into the cloaca's heart. The result: surprise floods in new churches. Basements turned into bathtubs of the past. One mason reportedly quit after discovering the bathhouse wall he was restoring was secretly a pressure valve for the old sewer. "The devil bathes beneath this city," he wrote. Probably not far off. You find yourself now beside a still-flowing gutter that's fed by a spring no one remembers naming. It bubbles quietly into a cracked channel lined with Roman stone. No ceremony, no marker, just water, still finding its path. Rome's plumbing didn't go gently. It rumbled. It erupted. It outlived the hands that built it and then punished those who ignored it. It was ancient technology with modern moods. And even today, beneath cafes and bookstores, it sometimes speaks. You step carefully across broken cobbles, now ascending toward one of the city's few remaining strongholds. After the collapse of the empire, a fortified medieval hilltop keep, once part of a grand villa, now transformed into a defensive outpost. Here, in a world where Latin prayers echo through stone walls and the streets below run with mud, you get a sobering glimpse of how far plumbing has regressed. The structure ahead leans slightly, as if embarrassed by its age. You enter through a low door and find yourself inside a drafty corridor, the walls stained with soot and rainwater. A chill clings to the air, and near the back, tucked into a cold, narrow tower, stands the medieval privy. It's a small stone bench with a hole, nothing fancy, and below it, a long vertical drop, straight down the side of the building. No pipes, no channels, just gravity. Welcome to the garderobe. In theory, the waste would fall into a cesspit or the moat. In practice, it landed wherever it landed, and God help you if someone walked beneath it at the wrong time. You peek out a narrow slit in the stone, and sure enough, a dark stain on the outer wall tells the tale. Medieval plumbing was less about redirection and more about evacuation. You look around. There's no cistern, no sponge, just a pile of ash and dried rosemary near the hole meant to mask the smell. You can imagine the user sitting here in the freezing dawn robes, pulled tight, breath-fogging feet dangling over centuries of missed Roman engineering. Historians still argue why plumbing regressed so sharply. Was it the cost? the loss of trained labor, the church's discomfort with communal bathing and nakedness, likely all of it. Bathhouses fell out of favor, seen as sinful. Indoor plumbing, too decadent, too Roman. Even simple systems like underfloor heating and aqueducts were abandoned. Rebuilding was rare, expensive, and often misunderstood. One record from 11th century England describes an attempt to channel fire through the floor, like the Romans, which resulted in a burned-down monastery and one very confused monk. You descend a rickety stairwell and find a medieval kitchen where water is stored in barrels collected from roof runoff. A wooden ladle floats inside. In the corner, a woman stirs a pot of stew beside a single clay drain pipe embedded in the wall. It carries waste outside, but poorly. There's no flow, no slope, just slow seepage and a prayer that the rats aren't home. One quirky artifact found in a 13th century farmhouse. A Roman bronze tap repurposed as a candle holder. Beautiful, yes. Functional, not anymore. As you step back outside, you notice the roof lines of neighboring structures, how they slope toward crude gutters which pour water into trenches carved into dirt. It's something, but it's not a system. It's a compromise. Even the wealthy live this way. Castles had garderobes. Monasteries had open trenches. Most people used buckets, pits, or went outside. In winter, you didn't want to know. And yet the memory of Roman plumbing lingered like a ghost beneath every drafty tower and crumbling street. People reused Roman bricks. They rebuilt walls along ancient aqueduct lines. Occasionally, someone would stumble across a pipe and marvel at how the ancients summoned water from stone. Rome's sewer gods were gone. Cloacina no longer received offerings. No one whispered to pipes. No one bathed in steamy marble chambers. The age of engineered cleanliness had slipped beneath the soil. And above it all, someone sat on a stone seat in the windlags, swinging into the abyss, thinking not of luxury, but of cold feet and splashing danger. You look out from the tower now, across the patchwork roofs of the city. Somewhere beneath those stones, forgotten and fractured, Rome's original plumbing still sleeps, waiting. You descend slowly from the medieval heights, passing from chill stone shadows into the sun-warmed ruins of the city below. Around you, Rome hums softly, not the bustling roar it once had, but a subtler rhythm. Footsteps on uneven flagstones, a fountain gurgling somewhere, pigeons cooing from shattered arches. You reach a modern plaza where children chase each other around a low fountain carved from the repurposed remains of an aqueduct support. It still works somehow. Water burbles from a brass spout shaped like a lion's head, tarnished now, but stubbornly functional. No one thinks twice about it. The plumbing simply flows. You sit nearby, letting your hands rest on the warm stone. Beneath you, threads of ancient engineering still lace the earth. The Cloaca Maxima remains intact in parts, guiding water beneath the city, just as it did over 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists crawl through it sometimes. Tourists photograph it, but most people walk over it without a second thought. Rome's plumbing legacy, like so much of Rome itself, is one of resilience and layers. Each system built atop the last, sometimes improving, sometimes forgetting, always leaving traces. Lead pipes still lie beneath streets, their ghost flows recorded in mineral deposits. Brick-lined drains whisper of the baths they once emptied. A broken valve tucked behind a modern cafe tells stories few customers ever hear. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly invented indoor plumbing or merely refined it to perfection. But no one disputes this. They made water a public art. They made sanitation political. They made sewage sacred. They taught the world that plumbing could be more than survival. It could be civilization. A breeze stirs the air. You close your eyes and listen. Beneath the murmur of city life, you can almost hear the water still moving, slipping between stone walls, tracing forgotten paths, humming beneath feet that never stop walking. You've walked those paths now too, from aqueducts in the hills to sponge sticks in the alleys, from imperial fountains to rebel plumbers, from goddess-blessed drains to medieval regrets. The pipes may crumble, the baths may cool, but the memory of a city that dared to move water through stone and silence that will never truly dry up